All right, Dan Rayfield is back on the show, longtime boxing insider, ESPN, USA Today, now doing work for Boxing Scene, RingTV.com, Ring Magazine, amongst others, and he is a true friend of the pod. What's up, Dan?
Hey, Chris. Good to see you in the bubble. Hope all is well down there.
All is well, man. I am bubbled up. I'm feeling safe from the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm getting really accustomed to mediocre food and hotel beds. So
there you go.
There's worse things you can do. But the boxing world continues to roll along, man. And a lot of stuff I want to get into with you. We were kind of talking offline about, the topics for this podcast are more, not fight related than they are fight related. Because right now, the fights aren't great. The ones that have been put together, and the big names are still on the shelf. And the biggest name I want to talk to you about right now is still Canelo. And I think we're both in agreement that September 12th is not going to happen. We're about a month away from that, presumed date, and there still is no opponent, no schedule, no nothing. So it doesn't appear that Canelo is going to fight on his favorite Mexican Independence Day for the second year in a row. But at some point, he has to fight, and there seems to be a pretty significant divide when it comes to Golden Boy, Dazn, and Canelo about how to resolve all this. So what's your read on this situation? What do you understand it to be that's going on amongst these three parties?
Well, a couple of things about it. Number one, like you said, September 12th is not happening. I mean, I don't think we're going to see like a formal announcement that it's not happening because they've never announced that it was happening. So they're not going to bring light to the fact that it isn't happening. But you can take it to the bank that he is not fighting on September 12th. And in some ways, it's not that big of a deal because part of the reason and the attraction of the holiday weekends for him in May and September is because it brings the huge crowds to the casinos and, on their holidays, and it's a big party. But if you can't sell tickets or have crowds, what Saturday night you fight on is really not relevant because you can't bring those fans in from Southern California, from Mexico, and throughout the boxing world, it really doesn't matter what weekend it is. So without crowds, September 12th doesn't really matter. But the issue right now is it's serious because you have a contract between Canelo and Dazn that calls for him to be paid $35 million. He's been having problems with his promoter, Golden Boy, but this issue now with Dazn, from everything I have been told and read into it and talk to different people, this is actually sort of bringing Golden Boy and Canelo closer together because they're sort of on the same side in this, whereas they want what they're supposed to get in the contract, and Dazn wants to pay them less because of the pandemic and the problems that they've had with their subscriber base because they haven't had big fights to offer, and the fact that there's just not that sort of mega opponent that's going to make them happy. They want the Triple G fight. They signed off on the Billy Joe Saunders fight for May with the stipulation that they had a deal agreed to for the Triple G fight to be next. Now, here they've signed him to this huge contract. They're now going to be 2 years into the contract, and they still are not going to get that big fight that they want. And they're not happy about it, and they're taking no prisoners. I mean, they want to slash the money that they want to pay Canelo dramatically. And if you're Canelo Alvarez, maybe you take some less money. He's, an understanding person, and the issues that are going on, and maybe you can take a little less and work something out and make him whole on the back end or defer some money, or there's different ways to work out these deals. But if they just come to you and say, we want to cut you dramatically, and I don't know the exact dollar figure, but it's a lot, he's like, what are you talking about? You have a contract. I'm supposed to fight. Let's get it done. But, it just doesn't look good right now. I think I would say at the moment, they're playing, both sides are sort of playing hardball. Maybe it's just sort of posturing a little bit, but it would not shock me if they wound up in some kind of litigation. Hopefully that doesn't take place. But, if he can come back and they can agree on things, maybe we'll see him in the ring, in the later part of the year. But again, even if you still can't have fans, I'm not sure how that's going to help the bottom line for either side. Like I said, I think Canelo is willing to take less money. The question is how much less money? And clearly there's a difference of opinion between him and his team and the folks that run Dazn.
Do you think they've figured out the other side of it, though? Because, you talked to Eddie Hearn. I talked to Eddie Hearn. Eddie's not suggesting that there's any deal in place for Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders. And I mean, that's a part of all this, right? Like they're not coming to the table, Golden Boy and Canelo, with any type of deal for these guys. I mean, how big a part of it is that, like not being able to find the opponent at this point?
Well, I think that's a big problem because, as far as I know, and I've talked to actually some people involved in this just over the last few days, to my knowledge, there's no actual, they've made offers here and there, but obviously it's dependent upon Canelo getting what he believes he's supposed to be getting contractually from Dazn to do the fight. But that would say that there's no actual deal done for Callum Smith or any other of the, a million fighters from 160 to 175 that have been mentioned as possible opponents. So there's no deal. And I have to say, my understanding is that the tensions between the sides have gotten so bad at this point that when it comes time to do Canelo conversations and business, the Golden Boy team and Canelo's lawyer are not even speaking at the moment directly with John Skipper, who runs Dazn. He's the executive chairman. They are speaking with the team around Len Blavatnik, who's the owner of the network, speaking with his legal representation about this. So John, who's been, I worked for John for many years when he was the top executive at ESPN. He's a very well thought of executive. He does I thought he did a great job when I worked for him at ESPN. But there's an issue here between this one client and talent and the executive side of things. So, it's gone even above him as they try to get this squared away, and hopefully everybody can get together.
I brought this up with Keith Idek last week, and I'll pose it to you as well. I think that some of this tension, or at least the resolve being shown by Dazn, has to do with the fact they didn't get the Golovkin fight last year. I mean, there's not a direct connection necessarily because, who the hell could have predicted a global pandemic last year? But if Golovkin had fought Canelo in September of last year and they had been able to get that fight off their books and get the subs that came with it and built the momentum they hoped they'd have to finish 2019, I honestly believe that Dazn would probably be a little bit more accommodating to Canelo right now. I think they'd be more willing to do stuff with him. But because Canelo dug in his heels, and for what seems like completely personal reasons, like it wasn't professional, like he would have made a ton of money to fight Golovkin. Golovkin knew what he was going to get as well. Golovkin was coming off that win over Steve Rolls. Because Canelo made it personal, or at least took the personal stuff into account in all this, he didn't accept that fight. And now here we are with Dazn going to have to pay Golovkin again to fight somebody else before he fights Canelo Alvarez, the third fight of this deal that they're going to pay him not to fight Canelo. And I think that's led to some pretty raw feelings within the offices over there.
There's no question about that. But here's the thing about it. If the pandemic had not have happened, Canelo would have fought, Gennady would have fought the mandatory, and they would have been fighting the next fight. But because May didn't happen, and neither did a spring fight for Triple G, it's knocked everything off schedule-wise. Combine that with the fact that Dazn spent 4 months without having a single stitch of live programming, at least in terms of, I can't speak for the soccer and other stuff, but in terms of boxing and, other sort of American-based sports that they are involved with, they had nothing to show. They had, your podcast and some other studio-type programming, but in terms of things that drive real subscriptions, and get a lot of attention like a big Canelo fight would have, they didn't have that. So they were sort of feeling it from both ends. And, I can't blame them for being upset. They've already given Canelo 3 fights. The first one against Rocky Fielding was one that was already done and set before he signed. That was sort of like the gimme. Then the first 2 real fights under the $35 million part of the agreement. He fought the 2 best guys out there other than Golovkin. That was Danny Jacobs, which was a big fight that everybody wanted to see at the time. Then he moved up 2 weight classes and he fought against Sergey Kovalev, and was a pretty big deal fight in my mind, and was going to have the Saunders fight, and then the next fight was supposed to be Golovkin. But of course, who could have predicted this? So I think one of the issues here, and both sides, have to understand that what's preventing all this is nothing that they can do anything about, and nothing that the other side can do anything about, because they can't control what's happening with the global pandemic. And so it's caused them to all have to sort of figure things out, and it's leading to a lot of, like you said, bad feelings and issues and possible legal threats, and, combing through contracts for fine print about this and that and what's guaranteed and what's not guaranteed. And, it's a big mess. And, the losers are Dazn, are Canelo, are Golden Boy, and our boxing fans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think it gets resolved anytime soon, but to your point, it doesn't really matter because of the crowd situation and that September 12th date. And you can even make an argument, and I don't think that anybody wants to make this argument, but college football is falling apart. we don't know if the NFL is going to fall apart. If you push this thing into late October, early November, you get away from the NBA as well. Like, there could be a real void in fall and winter months for people to watch something on TV when, in the colder months, people stay inside more and watch TV. So there's a possibility that if they can figure out their issues, they won't take too big a hit on his next fight.
Well, to that point, as you just mentioned about the fact that college football is sort of falling apart. I mean, some conferences have canceled. I think we're going to see quite a few more, and others certainly among the Big Five. But they're already making plans at ESPN, losing many college games already that they would have been televising, to ramp up the number of boxing events that Top Rank is going to do. So they don't necessarily have all those dates set yet. But as one person from Top Rank said to me yesterday when I was speaking to them, it's going to be a busy fall. In other words, they already knew they were going to have X number of dates, in September, October, and throughout the rest of the year, whether they were the regular ESPN fights or the ESPN Plus fights. But now you can probably take it to the bank just as much as the fact that Canelo is not going to fight on September 12th, that there'll be additional boxing events on the Top Rank ESPN schedule in the coming months because, again, they're going to want to fill up that live programming void. And when the NBA is going to be over, baseball, hopefully they can reach a conclusion, but they'll be done by earliest, part of November. And then they're going to have pretty much the rest of November, December, January, where you have tons of football, live football for college, not to mention all the studio programming as it relates to the NFL, which will also probably not be there because if there's no NFL games, there's even more programming to fill. So, we'll see more boxing. And hopefully Dazn and Golden Boy and everybody can figure out their business and bring us more fights when, like you said, people are going to be home in the winter months, stuck inside, watching TV. It's easy now, frankly, because, it's beautiful outside. You can take a walk, you can go to the pool, you can, go golf, you can go camping, you do a lot, you can sit outside, you can do a lot of stuff, take a bike ride, whatever it is. But it's not the same if you live in a cold weather area and it's the middle of January or December. Forget about it.
Yeah, no question. So let's talk about boxing's return over these last few weeks and months. Yeah, Top Rank and their run temporarily at the Bubble in Las Vegas. They had a couple of shows that were decent, but the numbers were middle of the pack, middling, I guess is the way you could put it. You had Showtime return with some pretty bad numbers in their first fight back. PBC on Fox came back this past weekend, and on paper the number looks good, but you have to remember Fox is one of the main broadcast networks. They're effectively a broadcast fire hose, so doing 800,000+ with a peak of just over 1 million is not all that impressive number for Fox. What have you interpreted from seeing these early ratings and how it impacts boxing?
I mean, I'm not trying to hate on anybody. I want everybody to succeed, whatever company, whatever promotion, whatever network. I know all these people. They work hard. They're trying to put on good events. So this is not a knock on those folks at all. I know how hard. I wrote the cover story for Ring Magazine on the current issue, which was about the return of boxing in the bubble, and detailed all the things that Top Rank went through to try to get this off the ground, and just the minutia and just the unbelievable things that they had to deal with to get these fights to take place. So all credit to them for doing that. Problem is, they for a variety of different reasons, none of these companies have been able to deliver truly meaningful, significant fights. So the combination of that plus fighters that are maybe not as well known, without a big fight to get people excited for the sport to look forward to, the ratings to be, again, I'm not trying to hate anybody. They've stunk. That's all there is to it. The ESPN numbers were pretty poor. The Showtime number for their first fight back, again, they put on a solid card, but really have to be to the total diehards because a lot of those guys were really completely unknown. There was not that much promotion for the show, which was, where Angelo Leo won a vacant 122-pound world title. They produced a historically low rating figure for Showtime, and they've been doing boxing since the mid-'80s. And the PBC card, like you mentioned on Fox, you're supposed to do over 1 million buys, or 1 million viewers rather, when you're on a main free network. And that was among one of the, ever since Fox did the rights deal with PBC a couple of years ago, I have to look at the final numbers, but I'm pretty sure it was either the lowest or among the top 2 or 3 lowest that they've had since they've been in that particular deal. You can even go back to when they were in the time buy part of that deal, and it was among the lowest ever. So everybody's got to pick up their game in promotion, number one. Number two, they have to put on some more compelling fights. Again, the show on Saturday with the main event on PBC, which was Jamal James against Thomas Delorme, That's a pretty solid fight. There was nothing wrong with it. In the ring, it turned out to be entertaining. If you watched it, you were not displeased or unhappy. Good decision, good action, back and forth, evenly matched. It had what you want to see. So that's a credit to PBC to make a good fight. But for some reason, the viewers did not want to see it. I mean, I don't have an answer for it. But if you look at boxing across the board, all the major companies in this country and on their broadcasters are down in a time when so many businesses are down. So, I guess we have to maybe call it the new normal, as they say, but I don't have an answer for it. But I do know one thing that would help. If we could somehow, whether there's fans or no fans, somehow, somewhere, figure out a way to get a couple of the bigger fights, some of the bigger stars, either Tyson Fury back in the ring, or Anthony Joshua back in the ring, or Canelo Alvarez, or Triple G, or any of the fights that we want to see. Now, there's some good fights on the schedule coming up. I think the Gervonta Davis fight against Leo Santa Cruz is a hell of a fight, but it's on pay-per-view. I think the two Charlo fights that are on the upcoming show in September, but they're both on a combined pay-per-view. So now you're asking folks to pay even more. And I understand how the business works, so I get that, but it doesn't help the sport as a whole to put those caliber events on pay-per-view. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, and this, the lack of interest right now isn't just stateside. I mean, you look over at the UK, you've got Frank Warren doing these shows for BT Sport with like some unbelievably low numbers. And Eddie Hearn, his fight camps haven't, set any kind of ratings on fire. I mean, I think his most recent one, the average was under 100,000, peaking at like 2. I mean, those are low numbers. He put a good card. Like the Cheeseman Eggington fight was excellent. Yeah, there was a good card. It was a very good card.
So I don't know. Again, the Frank Warren shows, which have been shown in the States also, on the ESPN platforms, they put on, for example, Joe Joyce in a complete walkover fight as he's coming back after a long layoff. They're supposed to be setting up the fight against Daniel Dubois, which was supposed to have already taken place, but because so many events were canceled when the virus started, they just felt like, let's get them back out there, put them in the tune-up and let them fight each other in October. So Joe Joyce had his fight a couple of weeks ago. Dubois is supposed to fight later in August, and then hopefully we'll see them in the real fight come the fall. But this just shows that if you can't have crowds which provide a significant amount of revenue for an event, it's very difficult to have the top guys, not only the top guys fight whoever, but certainly to have the top guys fight each other. I'm going to be very, very interested to see how they perform on pay-per-view when it comes time to see what happens with Errol Spence against Danny Garcia, an excellent fight. But are people going to spend $75 at this time to see that? It remains to be seen. And the same thing can be said about the two Showtime pay-per-view fights that have been announced with the two Charlo brothers on the one card and Gervonta Davis and Leo Santa Cruz on the other card. Again, good matchups, but pay-per-view sends a whole different situation. I think if those were on Showtime or Fox or whatever platform, they would get probably good numbers because there'd be a lot of excitement among boxing fans, probably a lot of press, a lot of stories, a lot of discussion. But you move it to pay-per-view, there'll still probably be a lot of stories and discussion, but whether people will pony up for it, that remains to be seen.
All right, let's talk about a fight that I'm pretty excited about that is almost all the way there. That's Ryan Garcia against Luke Campbell. Eddie Hearn said this week that there's a deal in principle. It sounds like they'll come to a conclusion on that either in the U.S. or the U.K. sometime in November. How big a test is this for Ryan Garcia? I think the whole boxing world is excited about Ryan Garcia's chances to become a big-time star in the sport. He's coming off back-to-back spectacular first-round knockouts. Romero Duno went down. Fonseca went down more spectacularly. He's got the looks. He's got the following. And now he faces a guy that on paper should be his toughest fight to date. I mean, how big a challenge do you see Luke Campbell as for Ryan Garcia?
I think it's a serious challenge, no question. Luke Campbell may not be world champion at the moment, but he gave, in a world title fight, gave Linares. He traveled from the UK to California to fight Linares in a very, very close fight. He lost, but it was super close. And even though in his next title opportunity against Lomachenko, where he fought him in London, in front of a hometown crowd, he lost again. It was fairly wide on the scorecards, so it looks like a blowout. But if you watch each individual round, it wasn't like he was completely blowout in each round. It was, he provided Lomachenko with some competition, which is hard for you to find too many guys in Lomachenko's career that have done that. So I think this is a huge, huge test for Ryan Garcia. I'm glad that Golden Boy and Eddie were able to come to an agreement, avoid the purse bid. And more significantly, it's one thing for the promoters to work their business out, but it's been well documented, all the issues that have been going on in the recent past between Golden Boy and Ryan to get themselves on the same page. I have not spoken to Ryan, but I did speak with Eric Gomez about this for a story that I wrote for the Ring magazine's website, where he said, look, yes, we made a deal where, they asked the WBC for a 7-day extension of the purse bid. That was meant to be able to just finalize the paper and put everything on and get the contract signed. So they both went to the organization. They gave them a permission. So within the 7 days of when that purse bid was to take place, sometime next week, they should have everything papered. But the key here is that Eric Gomez said to me, whatever issues they may have had with Ryan in the past about trying to put on his fights, like they tried to do a fight earlier this year. Instead, when Ryan turned it down, didn't like the money, they gave the date to Virgil Ortiz, and it looked spectacular against Samuel Vargas. But now Eric Gomez says that they, in fact, have a deal and are on the same page, and everything is cool with Ryan Garcia. So if they're united and you have Eddie Hearn and Luke Campbell, this is a dynamite fight. And the thing is that I like about it also, besides just the matchup itself, because I'm very excited about that. I think Luke's a dynamite technician. That was a great amateur. And, he's worthy of this kind of fight. Ryan Garcia has been looking for this kind of step-up fight for a while. And I know how explosive he can be and how excited he would be for this caliber of a match. But the great thing about it is the winner of the fight, it's not only is it a great fight on its own, it sets up a potentially great fight beyond that, because the winner of this fight is going to have the WBC's interim title. And I know I don't really put a lot of stock in interim titles, but what it means is that fighter is going to become the #1 challenger to take on Devin Haney, who's the WBC's champion. So if that, and that's a doable fight also, because if Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, and Luke Campbell are all associated of having their bouts on DAZN in the United States, it makes it a little easier to get those kinds of fights done. Shouldn't really be anything holding it back. Now, I'm a little skeptical maybe that we'll see Haney against Garcia, but stranger things have happened. But I'm not want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I'm super excited about Garcia and Luke Campbell. It's a really good fight. May not be the biggest fight, but it's the kind of fight that can happen in the pandemic because, yes, it would generate a gate in either country because both guys have popularity at home, but it's not such an enormous gate that they can't figure out a way to overcome that. It's not millions and millions of dollars that they would have to leave on the table like it would be if it was even a couple million for a Lopez Lomachenko, all the way up to the 17 million that you mentioned that came into the till for Wilder and Fury too. So good fight, big test, important fight, and the kind of fight that can be done in these weird times without having crowds to be able to buy tickets.
Yeah, and Garcia is one of those guys that even at 22 years old, he's risen above the belts, right? Like, I loved it watching
I don't know about that.
But he's risen above the belts, at least when it comes to Devin Haney, because we both know that Eddie Hearn and Devin Haney would make that fight tomorrow. Like that, they want him, not vice versa. Like that's more the dynamic when it comes to that specific matchup. And
I still think though that at his age and where he's in his career, belts still matter to him. At the later stage of an Oscar De La Hoya career or Canelo's career or a lot of superstar fighters, Sugar Ray Leonard, whoever it was, they didn't need belts at that time. Ryan Garcia is just a young kid who's still starting out, as he's still not really fought the top guys. He needs a belt to validate himself in many ways, in my mind.
But people want him is more my point. Like he does need to become a world champion in a legitimate world championship fight. But all these title holders, that are, and I'm not speaking of Lopez and Lomachenko necessarily because they're on their own, doing their own separate thing. But there are a lot of fighters between 130, 135, even 140 that would jump at the chance to fight Ryan Garcia because that popularity brings a bigger paycheck. And as you know, that transcends titles as much as anything. The pay matters more than the belt there. But let me say that there's one thing about Luke Campbell in this fight. Eddie made it clear in his comments to Sky that it could take place either in the U.S. or the U.K. And his deal with DAZN, like being in the U.K., may not be a bad thing for them because they plan to launch globally at some point. I like if crowds are allowed to go into the venues in the U.K. by the time this fight gets made. I love the idea for Ryan Garcia. It's almost a rite of passage, Dan, for young fighters to go overseas and fight big fights. We saw Terrence Crawford win his first title off Ricky Burns. We saw Errol Spence go over there and beat up on Kell Brook. Like, it's not the same thing necessarily, but I would love to see how Ryan Garcia responds in a hostile environment. And from being at many of those shows, I mean, those UK fans are legit. So if Luke Campbell's not the biggest of stars, but they'll be there to support him en masse. And I think it'd be a great experience for Ryan Garcia.
Yeah, I think that would be terrific. And I think obviously if they're able to do a fight with crowd in attendance in the United States, and Luke has fought in America on more than one occasion. Certainly the biggest fight he had with Linares. The way that it was described to me by Eric Gomez is that they have worked out different parameters of their deals for each side. If it's in the UK, it's this provisions. If it's in the United States, it's under these provisions. So they've really, I think they've gone through and very meticulously gone through it, because there were so many variables that's one of the reasons it probably took a long time to get the deal done, was because they had to work through all those scenarios. Well, what if we can't have crowds in America, but we can in Britain? What if it's, vice versa? But I agree. I think Ryan Garcia's got the kind of personality and mentality where, he enjoys the crowd adulation when he fights in a place like Southern California, but he's also got something in him where, he can have like that, almost like he'll smile and look great and then stab the guy in the back, like where he's got that cold-bloodedness in him. I think he would thrive in that kind of hostile territory where, be a great heel in that environment. So I think they're down for whatever. I know Ryan just wants to prove himself. Obviously, Luke wants to, get that young guys, the popularity that Ryan has, and show, look, you may be popular, but I'm the better fighter. There's so many good things about that matchup, and I can't wait for it. I'm glad they made the deal.
Let me finish with a little bit of boxing free agency news. Regis Prograis separates from Lou DeBella. I think we all saw this coming for the better part of the last few weeks or months. He is a promotional free agent. He has spoken to everybody. I think he's headed for PBC, at least on some kind of short-term deal. I've heard Juan Heraldez's name mentioned as a prospective opponent for him in some kind of a comeback-ish fight. What do you make of that situation, Dan? Regis separating from Lou, and what do you think his best options are as a free agent?
Well, it's disappointing that he and Lou would separate, because they were very good for each other. Lou did a good job for him, and Regis, obviously he was involved in some big fights that Lou helped him get, and Regis won most of them, other than a very close loss to Josh Taylor in the World Boxing Super Series final. So, they were good for each other. You never like to see that break up. I'm really not sure what the reasons are, to be quite honest with you. I think there's a lot of stuff that was going on behind the scenes that didn't necessarily have to do with Regis himself. But the main thing is, you say, what's the best move for him free agent wise? If PBC is willing to give him a short-term deal and offer an opponent like a Heraldez for a good purse, I mean, to me, you take that, because, it's probably a win. He's going to get paid, and then he can go through the free agency again and still keep his options open for the winners of the next, Ramirez and Postol are fighting later this month. You have Josh Taylor is going to be fighting his mandatory also coming in September. So there's going to be opportunities, in that weight class. But the guys I just mentioned, they're with Top Rank. So I don't know, what the financial considerations would be, what Regis is wanting to get paid for these fights. But if it's just in terms of you want to fight, and listen, the fighters always say, I want to fight the best. I want to fight the best. If you fight the best, the money usually follows. So in terms of the competition out there, he's probably best served with Top Rank, because they're the promoter for Ramirez, who has 2 titles, and they're the promoter for Josh Taylor, who has the other 2 titles. Now, if Victor Postol happens to pull the upset and gets the 2 titles, where does Victor Postol fight? He's a PBC guy. That deal was made between Top Rank and PBC. So he doesn't have to sign right away. He can sit back and wait and see what happens in a fight like that. And let's say Victor Postol's got the titles and he still has an opportunity to go for PBC. He can go there and maybe, be guaranteed a shot at Postol, or maybe same thing with Top Rank if he sees that Jose Ramirez is the winner. And again, I don't know how much longer he wants to stay at 140. Eventually, he's going to probably want to be a welterweight. Now, he didn't want to do that for the Maurice Hooker fight that was on at a lower weight, then canceled because he didn't want to go up that much more weight. Certainly, PBC is the land to be for welterweights. They've got all the top guys for the most part, other than Terrence Crawford. So I think he's probably, best served at the moment. Talk to the different groups, see what they're offering, see what's out there. And you just have to sit back for a couple of weeks, really, see what happens maybe in the Ramirez Postal fight, and then go from there. But I think, Regis Prograis is an outstanding fighter. He's one of the best fighters in the world at 140, even if he is coming off the loss. And he makes good fights. He's a, Chris, we both interviewed him several times. He's a wonderful guy to talk to. He's got a lot of gift for gab, and he makes good fights. So he's going to be a commodity. People are going to want to sign him. It's just going to be about, whether they can, if they're in the same ballpark on the money. I don't know the exact desires, but, his asking price is very high. I blame him.
Yeah, I think PBC, both short and long term, is what's best for Regis Prograis. I don't think you can think about titles, at least not for a while, because we both know that if Ramirez wins and Taylor wins, they'll fight at some point in 2021. And I think the winner of that fight's gone. I think they go up to welterweight and become a challenger for Terrence Crawford at much bigger money at that point. It's more opinion than fact on that subject. So I think if you're Prograis, you keep talking about becoming a title holder. I mean, is it really that important to you to win a vacant title if that's the ultimate case? I think PBC is smart because, look, from what I hear, he's getting offered decent money to fight Juan Heraldez, which I think would be a pretty easy win for him if he's in shape and good to go. And then, the name Adrian Broner keeps floating out there. And Broner's made some noise about coming back down into the lower weight classes. I don't think he makes 135. That's probably a pipe dream.
But 140, no interest in seeing Adrian Broner in a significant fight.
Well, what if Broner can get low-level wins over the next 6 months and you get Prograis in early 2021? I know, but like if he gets a couple of low-level wins, I wouldn't mind seeing him against Prograis. I think that's a marketable fight.
You know what? I'm done with Broner. So whatever you say.
Okay. You're finished. That's
Listen, this is not anything against Adrian, the human being. You know, I don't have anything against him. I actually rather like Adrian. I've known Adrian since he was about 18 years old and an amateur, or I should say, right after he turned pro. And I've covered numerous of his fights. But he no longer takes boxing seriously. He doesn't deserve or hasn't gotten the wins to warrant these bigger fights. So to see him as just thrown in there as the opponent for Regis Prograis just to get a name on the record that doesn't mean a whole lot anymore, I'm not into it. You know, let him, if he wants to be serious about boxing, and I've seen stuff on social media, I'm going down to 135. I'll believe it when I see it. Get your butt in the ring and win a couple of fights. Get off Instagram and go do your job, and then come see me. Otherwise, until then, I have zero interest in seeing Adrian Broner in a low-level fight or a high-level fight.
You know what I wonder, Dan, to finish up this topic, a year from now, if we're sitting here talking about Regis Prograis and we're sitting here talking about the career of Maurice Hooker, will they regret not coming to an agreement on that August fight? Like, they're not making, the rest of this calendar year, neither one of them is going to make anything close to what they were scheduled to make, even with the pandemic discount on that fight on the Dazn card, and not being able to come together over a couple of pounds, or even if it was just 1 pound at the very end. I mean, I wonder if both these guys, because from what I hear, Dan, you might hear something similar, like Hooker's having a hard time finding fights that'll pay anything at this point. And I wonder if both these guys will look back at seeing that as a pretty big mistake.
I do think it was a mistake. The fight was made. They had signed contracts. They were jerking around as it came down to the end. Like, I think it was actually like a half a pound, because Hooker had said to me 144 or 145, and Regis would only go up to like 144, whatever it was. It was very close.
Yeah.
And these fights, when they're hard enough to make in the first place, when it doesn't happen, you never make up that payday. These guys were both making for the fight, in the higher six figures to do the match. They'd even already had I attended the press conference that they had in Texas, the day before or 2 days before Jesse Vargas fought Mikey Garcia. There was already, pretty decent amount of hype for the fight. Yes, it got postponed because of what was going on, but it would have been, most likely, if they'd been able to keep it together, probably would have been the main event of Eddie's first show back, which is taking place on Saturday in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's, originally it was going to be Martinez in a flyweight defense. That fell out, so they moved up the co-feature with Cecilia Breck, who's the defender women's title, but it probably would have been Hooker and Prograis to do that fight. It was a very good fight that a lot of people had interest in. Like you said, I don't know when these guys are going to fight next. Regis is, going to look around, and he's talking to different promoters. Maurice Hooker's contract is almost up with Eddie Hearn. I think he has one more fight left on that deal, but like you said, probably not going to make anywhere close to what he was going to make for the fight against Regis had it taken place. So, I can't sit here and say that they're both going to regret having not taken the fight, because you don't know what they're going to get. I suspect that it's going to be easier for Regis to get a more of a name fight or a bigger paycheck at this moment than it will be for Hooker. So maybe Hooker will have more regret. But I have to say this: I know they signed at a certain weight to do the fight, but I know it wasn't easy for him. And I talked to Maurice when it happened, and I feel for him. He's like, I just cannot make that weight at this point anymore. And so rather than BS everybody and go through the motions and say I'm going to be on great shape, I'm making the weight, and then all of a sudden show up the day before the fight and be way over and just cause a lot of controversy. At least he manned up and said, months ahead of time, listen, I can't get down. So we can still do the fight. We have to adjust the weight. He was honest about it because it cost him the payday. If he had struggled and not made the weight, but they still did the fight, maybe he takes a clip on a fine, but he still gets paid and the fight happens even if he loses. So I'll give him credit for at least letting everybody know way in advance, look, we got to adjust the weight. Regis is totally entitled to say no thank you, and that's what happened. I'm very disappointed. I was really amped up for that fight, and maybe down the road at welterweight someday in the future, a couple years from now or whatever, we could see them back in the ring, and actually get it on. But I think in the end, the person that probably will regret the fight not happening the most at this moment, if we're talking about 1 year from now, it's probably going to be Maurice Hooker, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, bird in the hand and money in the pocket. And that was a significant amount of money they were both going to make for that fight. Dan, always a pleasure, man. You can follow Dan on Twitter at DanRayfield1. You can check Dan out at Ring Magazine, ringtv.com, and, of course, over at boxingscene.com. Always good to catch up, Dan. Maybe next time we'll have some actual good fights, high-level fights that we can get into on the podcast.
I appreciate it, Chris. Thank you, and enjoy the bubble. And I was going to bring some granola bars here for you to show you on the podcast, but I left them in the cabinet. So I know you're
two words, Dan. Room service.
There you go.
Covered.
Enjoy.